Hello guys, it's me Blue Elf and today I want to share a very important piece of information by Henrick. Yes, few days ago Henrick posted a video on the YouTube channel explaining the F3 screen and how the world is generating and ton of information about that. So today in this video I am going to present the highlights from this video, so just chill, relax and enjoy this piece of content. By the way, subscribe if you want more content like this, and now enjoy.
So I'm about to do a bit of survival testing as part of preparing for a snapshot. And I figure why not share that experience. We'll explore the world and I'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing. And maybe also explain a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes with World Generator. A little bit about what's going on here. So some people have noticed that there's new stuff down here, which wasn't there before. Multi-noise, biome builder, terrain, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to explain some of these things as we go. So, but high level, these are what we call noise values. So C, for example, which actually is called continentalness, but we abbreviate things because we don't want this debug screen to be too cluttered. C, it changes. So in this direction, the continentalness apparently goes up. In the other direction, it goes down. We use that to control both the terrain shape and the biome placement. So for example, continentalness actually works like what it sounds like. Like the further inland you go, that number goes up. Or more like it's opposite. The higher that number is, the more we're going to generate inland terrain. Look at this cave. This is beautiful. This is one of the things we kind of want to be able to happen. We want cave biomes to be able to kind of leak out a little bit from cave entrances, exactly like this. This is exactly what we want to achieve, because it's really, really fascinating and kind of inviting when you see this happen. So this brings me, I guess, maybe to the next multi-noise parameter. So I talked about continentalness, right? So bigger number equals more inland in general. E stands for erosion. Higher erosion, we use that basically to make the land flatter. And low erosion makes the land more mountainous and uneven. For example, negative 0.9, that would basically be very hilly or very mountainous terrain, or very cliffy terrain. While erosion 0.7, 0.8, high values, then it's basically very flat or kind of swampy type terrain. And yes, those numbers are used both to control the terrain shape and the biome placement parameters. Let's talk about, these two. Temperature and humidity, T and H. And those two actually don't impact terrain shaping. They just impact biome placement. And different biomes kind of live in different configurations of these. So jungles are hot and humid. So as that number goes up and that number also goes up, we're more likely to find things like jungle. While deserts are a little more dry, so high temperature and lower humidity means you're more likely to hit a desert. And I don't have a bed and it's becoming night, so I should stop blabbering about that stuff and actually, we didn't plan on adding another mountain biome, but we noticed that in like kind of warm areas, it just didn't really look so good that all peaks were snowy or icy. So we wanted to make space for kind of a hot biome variant of peaks. I was talking about erosion, right? So let's take a look at that. Erosion is negative 0.6, not as low as I thought it would be, but still we got a nice peak here. Oh yeah, that's an important thing. This one down here. PV stands for peaks and valleys. This noise is actually derived from another noise called weirdness over here. So at certain places, when weirdness goes up kind of between -1 and 1, gradually and randomly, but peaks and valleys is like an exaggerated version of that. So for example, when this value is 0, peaks and valleys is going to be -1. It's going to sharply drop to -1. And when it's around where it is now, peaks and valleys kind of sharply goes up. And what this PV noise does, it basically controls things like this. We are right now on a mountain peak. It's like, kind of like a ridge, right? You can follow it. And down there you see kind of a ridge as well. So that ridge is basically where peaks and valleys is kind of high, then it tends to make ridges. And conversely, when peaks and valleys is low, that's when you get, that's not a river, but rivers basically. So whenever we're inside a river, then peaks and valleys will probably be a negative number. So the combination of the biggest mountains you'll find when continentalness is high, erosion is low, and peaks and valleys is high. So here it says the peaks and valley noise is negative 0.9. That's about as low as, almost as low as it can get. So this would have been a river. But we set it so that if we're in terrain that is otherwise quite high, so erosion is low and continentalness is not so low, then we don't always want rivers carving through here, because that would be 20 blocks lower. And this would be a gorge. And gorges are really cool, but not if they're all over the place. So in this case, it got lifted up to this nice saddle valley. So it's a valley with kind of mountains on either side, but it's a nice flat area. So instead of this being a super, steep gorge with a river inside it, this is actually an area that I can build stuff on and, run around inside and things. So we try to make, a bit of both. So sometimes rivers will carve gorges through a valley, and sometimes it'll rise up and form this kind of saddle valley. 5 noises, right? So as I move around in the world, these numbers all change gradually, which means that it's essentially a 5-dimensional coordinate space. So there's a lot of ways in which the terrain can change. Moving in this direction, if let's say I move in this direction, depending on which of these numbers change and in which direction they change, that's going to impact the terrain. So that makes the terrain very unpredictable and kind of interesting. So even, even as a developer, I find it sometimes hard to predict what's actually going to happen. I don't really know. I often get surprised, and that's great. That's exactly what we want. And it's night, and I still don't have any darn sheep. So let's you'd have just a splotch of snow in the middle of some terrain because a mountain almost formed there, just barely almost formed there. And that ties into a general challenge we have with these noise values. They move up and down, right? So let's say we get to a point where the noise values are exactly at the point where, let's say, snowy slopes should form. But then one of the noises turns around and goes another direction. So then the snowy slopes end immediately. So then you get this, tiny bit with like 10 blocks of snow, and then it goes away. So it's basically, with the current technology, we can't set a minimum biome size. They'll just be whatever size they are. However, we can tweak the configuration of these noises, like how fast they change and things like that. We can tweak it to make it less likely. So a lot of people have been asking about the so-called microbiomes, and we didn't want to have microbiomes, we didn't design for it, but it is a consequence of the new terrain generation. I guess kind of a price we pay for all this awesome variation. Sometimes we'll also get some things that are a little bit ugly. A bit. So let's see, what else do we have here? So these are the noise values, right? Continentalness is how far inland we are. Erosion is basically how mountainous we are, although it's opposite. Low valley means high mountains. Temperature, humidity impact the choice of biome. All the biomes are also impacted by these first two. And weirdness indirectly drives the peaks and valleys noise. But weirdness also, when it flips between negative and positive, that also influences which biome variant we get. So for example, if we are in plains, sometimes we're going to be in the flowery plains instead, and then it might get negative value. Same thing with like jungle versus bamboo forest or bamboo jungle. Down here, biome builder, this is basically the categorized version of these numbers. So each interval has a name. So for example, well, actually not all intervals do, but for example, the continentalness of 0.232 is within the interval that we call mid-inland. If we go near a coast, this number goes down, and finally it'll say coast there, for example. And same thing with these numbers, erosion and temperature and humidity. We basically slice them up into intervals, and each interval has a number. So this is a very low erosion value, so that's erosion 0, or erosion index 0. When that goes up, we'll after a while hit erosion index 1. And I think it goes all the way up to 5 or 6. And that's what biomes care about. Whenever that number changes, we are at a threshold which may switch which biome we're in. So we're at erosion index 0, temperature index 2, humidity index 4. Floating blocks. This is one of those things, kind of, famous Minecraft quirkiness things. And it is actually possible for us to, we could eliminate floating blocks entirely by just changing some numbers. We can make it impossible to happen. But if we did that, we would also make some really interesting terrain impossible to happen. So everything would become more predictable, more kind of samey, and it would be kind of boring. So we prefer to keep the configuration in such a way that we allow for crazy terrain, including floating blocks, because it just makes the game more interesting and enjoyable. It basically lowers the terrain dramatically when we hit the coast. And what's interesting is the shape of the terrain depends on what was the erosion at when we hit the coast. So here we have high erosion, or it's more like we have very low erosion and a coast. So therefore we get cliffs, because low erosion means mountainous kind of cliffy terrain. So that's what generates these awesome, crazy, cool cliffs. If we were at a high erosion area, which means flat terrain near sea level, we would be seeing flat beaches and flat terrain. So it's a combination of these noises that makes for interesting terrain variation. I love the combination, and this is something we worked hard for, the combination of big flat areas like this, well, flat-ish, and then kind of surrounded by mountains and peaks of various sorts. Because, what good are mountains and cliffs if you can't see them? Because when you're in them, you can't really see them. But if you're kind of a little bit away from them, then you can see them and admire them. And the same thing in another direction, if I'm standing on top of a peak and look down on a big flat area, that's also really beautiful. This here is an aquifer, or more like this is a cave, okay? It is probably a noise cave, maybe a carver. And the way it works is when caves are being kind of dug out, they may or may not place water, and water is decided by aquifers. So an aquifer is basically a part of the world where there is a local water level. And what we've noticed is, if the water level here would be different from sea level, right? Let's say the water, because here this water level is at Y63, which is sea level. If this bit here would have a lower water level, it looks kind of ridiculous. So what we've done is we've made the aquifers take into account if we're near rivers or coasts or not. You can see that right here, it says near water, right? As I move inland, here, near water, right? And as we go over here, no longer near water, which means we got lucky, because that's what allows this cave to be actually a cave entrance, right? We could go down here and find caves. But if this was near water, then this would have all been sea level. And again, the reason for that is because we noticed that local water level looks really ugly when it's right near coastlines. Some of these noises are 3D noises, others are 2D noises. And what I mean by that is, let's say I'm going to tower up a little bit, right? Continentalness and erosion are examples of 2D noises. They don't change as I go up. They stay the same. So they only change when you go horizontally. While temperature and humidity are 3D noises. So you can see the numbers change, right? You can go up or down. And the reason for that is because temperature and humidity aren't used for terrain shaping. They're only used for biome placement. And biomes are 3D because there might be lush caves down here somewhere. And lush caves only show up in a certain temperature interval. So by having this very vertically, that means that an underground biome could show up in a specific vertical range. So I could find a lush cave, and then below it, there might be some other, underground biome. So that's why temperature and humidity are 3D noises, while the others are 2D noises. There, F505. F stands for factor. It's a dumb name, but it's basically, like, when the world is created, it's basically all like that. Like, there's no surface. It's just a crazy mess of stone and air all over the place. It's crazy. Imagine, like, shattered terrain, but times 10. And then all that gets flattened down by some factor, and that's what this means. Right, so factor is 388 right now. As that number goes down, normally I think the default is around 600 when you're running around, and most terrain has 600, which is pretty much typically plains type flatness, right? And this is independent of like the plateaus and mountains. This is added on top, right? But some parts of the world are configured to get more 3D noise. It's just 3D noise is our term for this kind of thing. And as that number goes down, we'll see the terrain get more and more crazy. Ouch. So factor is 299, and as we go here, factor goes down to 163 and 138, and there we go, 80. That's about as low as it gets. You won't find any place that goes lower than 80. This is what we call shattered terrain. If you go to old Minecraft and go and find a shattered savanna, which is really hard to find, by the way, you can't see these numbers on the debug screen, but factor will be 80. And factor 80 basically creates that kind of terrain, sometimes even crazier. If you're interested in the technology, or if you're going to make custom worlds, this kind of stuff is super interesting. As a player, you don't really need to care about it, but indirectly, you're affected by it, because you can learn as a player that, oh look, savanna, that's kind of dry and hot. If I keep going in that direction, I'm probably more likely to find other hot biomes, such as deserts and badlands. Just like in reality, right? If you get in a generally hotter climate, you're more likely to find hotter biomes. Yeah, here you can see exactly what happened. Coastal, right? Or near ocean. We're not near water now, technically. But somewhere over here, that threshold happened, near water. So here we're near water, therefore we must use sea level. And over here, we're not near water, therefore the aquifer gets to randomly decide a water level. In this case, it decided to set the water level really low. So it places a barrier automatically to avoid the water just hanging there, and it allows for holes in the barrier to allow for waterfalls. So that's why this happened. Again, not realistic, but definitely fun. If we look at these threshold values, right, we're at erosion index 2, temperature index 4, humidity index 2, right? And these biomes care about temperature and humidity. So let's watch those numbers, right? Temperature 4, humidity 2. There, humidity became 3. So it got just a little bit more humid. And that was enough to toggle, this jungle edge biome instead of desert. And that would have been fine if it continued that way. But then we got up here, and humidity is now going back down again, because it's random, right? So the question really was, why is there not badlands here if it's hot? Well, that's because we switched from mid-inland to near-inland, which means continentalness went down from 0.035 to below 0.3, which I guess is a threshold. So because we're starting to near the coast, we don't want badlands right near the coast. That's why there's jungle edge here. But then the question is, why does it then become badlands again over here? Or more like, why does it become desert down here? And the reason why it became desert was because it suddenly became drier. So we had this double shift happening. We got closer to the coast here, so suddenly it becomes jungle edge, and then it became drier, so suddenly it became desert. So those two things in combination caused this little tiny jungle. We keep wanting to play and keep wanting to explore and look around the next corner or look over the next mountaintop. That's a good sign. That means we're on the right track. And I find that happens a lot nowadays, so I feel pretty happy about the terrain generation now. So the fixes we're making now are mainly kind of like just the last things, the last major issues. And I think we got them kind of under control now, so that we can focus on performance, because performance is the most important thing right now, I would say, now that the terrain is starting to look decent.
So that is all in today's video, and by the way, if you want more information about that, then the link of the full video will be in the description. Go and check it out. I hope you like this content, and if you like more content like this, then please consider subscribing, and see you guys in the next video. Bye.